Once upon a time, there was a BookTube channel that asked a very different question. What books have I read that Goodreads thinks are just completely terrible?
Giddy up.
Giddy up. Welcome back to BellTube. You know, lately I've seen some channels that are out there that I absolutely love, examining their favorite books and what the Goodreads reviewers thought of them to see if they kind of lined up. I was going to maybe do the same thing. And then I realized that they all sort of fall kind of in that same line. You get the Stormlight archives, you get a little bit of the Wheel of Time, you get a Song of Ice and Fire. It's kind of a same old list. So rather than doing that, I asked myself, which of the books that I've already read do Goodreads reviewers think are utter garbage and trash? I thought this would make for an interesting video. We're going to find out. I have no idea. So we're going to play a game called Are They Right or Are They Wrong? The rules of the game are simple. I will tell you the book. I will tell you who the author is. I will tell you what the Goodreads average score is. And then we're going to decide, are they right or are they wrong? Actually, I'm going to decide on behalf of the BellTube community, but you can agree or disagree in the comments for sure. Okay, let's get to it. First, as usual, there's a caveat. Now, the book that I've read on all of my Goodreads that Goodreads reviewers think is the worst happens to be a book I want to make its own entire video about. I'm not going to share with you what it is right now because it is by far, in my opinion, the worst piece of dreck ever written in the science fiction and fantasy world. That one's getting excluded from this list, but trust me, there will be a video about it. The first book that we're looking at is Armada by Ernest Cline, author of Ready Player One. Armada is what you get if you combine Ender's Game with The Last Starfighter. It comes in at a 3.55 Goodreads score. Now, is Goodreads right? They are absolutely right. This book is terrible. All it is full of 80s references. He basically cloned his methodology for doing Ready Player One, threw it into another book. I could not stand this book. I think I gave it a 2, maybe a 3. I might not have even rated it at all. But we're going to move past this one. Goodreads reviewers on Armada, yes, score 1 point, you are correct. The next book on the list comes in at a score of 3.69, and coincidentally enough, this is so strange, I happen to be reading it right now. I'm about 40% into it. It is The Worm Ouroboros. Now, this is part of our DNF January challenge. I don't know if they're right or wrong quite yet because I'm only 40% in, but if I grade this with the 40% that I'm in right now, are the Goodreads reviewers right or wrong? They are wrong. So far, so good on The Worm Ouroboros. I am completely blown away. I started this book at the beginning of the month because I thought it was going to be the worst one on the list. You guys, it's really pretty good. I'm going to get into all of these DNF challenge books as we go through the month, and especially a big wrap up at the end of January. But they're totally wrong on this one. We're moving on. The score is they're right once, but they're wrong once. And of course, by the way, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. It helps quite a bit. Like the video, hit that post notification bell so you never miss a video when we drop them. The next book on the list comes in at a 3.76 score, and that is The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. This is a really hard one to judge because I read it when I was so young. But as I think about it and as I scanned through the book a little bit, and as I read the recaps of it, I read some of the other reviews, I went back to Wikipedia, I read kind of a recap of the story. Let's find out. Are the Goodreads reviewers correct that The Sword of Shannara is not very good? Or are they wrong? They're correct. It's not that good. Reading it through a lens of about an 11 or a 12-year-old, yeah, I probably liked it. But I suspect that if I were to pick up that book right now, today, and read it, I'd probably fall in line with Goodreads. So right now the score is reviewers are correct 2, reviewers are incorrect 1. Okay, the next book on the list comes in at a 3.79 score on Goodreads, and it is the sloggiest slog of the slog ever. You know what I'm talking about if you've read The Wheel of Time. It is Crossroads of Twilight. Oh, Patrick, my good friend Patrick out in Indonesia, you are about to embark on what's possibly the biggest slog quicksand ever in 2024 if this is on your TBR. I know you've mentioned it, and my friend, oh boy, yeah, this is going to be kind of an easy one. Are the Goodreads reviewers correct in their assessment of Crossroads of Twilight? The answer is they are absolutely correct. That brings the score to 3, yes, they're right, to 1, no, they're wrong. The next book on the list is a book that I've talked about quite a bit. Actually, I've talked about the series, and it's book 1 in the Eric Carter series, and the book's called Dead Things. It also got a 3.79 on Goodreads. Now, you know me, I love urban fantasy, and if you've been a viewer of BellTube, you know I feel quite strongly that Eric Carter's amazing. But here we go anyway, we gotta play the game. Are the Goodreads reviewers correct that the Stephen Blackmore book Dead Things, book 1 in Eric Carter series, is good or bad? Are they right? They are. They're wrong. They were totally wrong. That brings us to a score of correct 3, totally wrong 2. The next book on the list comes in at a 3.83 average review. This is a fantastic book. You already know what I'm going to rate it. It's book 1 in Book of the New Sun, Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. We don't need a whole lot of preface here. Are the Goodreads reviewers right or are they wrong that Shadow of the Torturer is not a good book? They are. Of course they're wrong. It's one of the best book series of all time. That brings us to a score of 3-3. Now, this next book comes in at an average Goodreads review rating at 3.85. Now, if you've watched much BellTube, and if you watched in particular the last episode, you know where I stand on this book, and that is Susanna Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It's a whopper of a book. I'm not exactly sure why the Goodreads reviewers rated it the way that they did, but we must ask the question. Are the Goodreads reviewers correct? Incorrect. Are they right? Are they wrong? Clearly, I gave it 5 stars, so they are wrong. They're totally dead wrong. All right, let's move on. And for those of us playing at home, that means Goodreads reviewers are right with a score of 3 and wrong with a score of 4. So I'm calling that score right now 4-3. They are wrong. The Goodreads reviewers lose this game because the next several books that I want to share with you real quickly, and we're going to rapid fire these. This is kind of like a game show, so let's rapid fire them. This next book, Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson, first book in Malazan Book of the Fallen. I don't know why Goodreads reviewers don't seem to love it so much, but I'm excited to read Malazan. I know that a lot of my friends think it's the best series ever written. I'm going with them on that one, so they're wrong there too. The next book that they're wrong about is The Dark Towers, book 1, The Gunslinger. Here we meet one of my favorite protagonists in all of fantasy. I loved The Dark Tower. If you haven't seen yet where I rate The Dark Tower, go back and watch my top 10 fantasy series. It's on there, so obviously book 1 is not one of the worst books on my book list. Apparently, Goodreads reviewers also don't like the classics because they don't care for Don Quixote either. This is a really cool book, by the way. When I do my bookshelf tour, this book was printed in 1931. I inherited from my grandparents a whole collection of these Harvard classics. There are some outstanding selections in here, but Cervantes' Don Quixote is very lowly rated on Goodreads. They're obviously very wrong there too. Here's how I know that the Goodreads review community may not have it all together. Have you ever heard of a semi-famous author named Bill Shakespeare? Oh, I guess he goes by William Shakespeare. Yeah, so they don't really care for Julius Caesar. Yeah, pretty good story. They don't really care for A Midsummer Night's Dream, and they really don't like a small-known tale, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, called Macbeth. Yeah, so where does that leave us? Which brings us to the one for the road segment, and that is choose your influences wisely. I love BookTube, and I've mentioned many times before, I found BookTube really through Mike's book reviews, and I got very lucky that his recommendations line up really well with what I like. If I would have found a different reviewer, or if I would have found some channels that were recommending books that I just couldn't stand, I wouldn't have a channel today. I'd probably have not read nearly as much. I know I wouldn't have read nearly as much over the last 3 years. So your influences do matter, for good or for bad. And I would just suggest choose them really wisely. And of course, here's your fortune.